Mr. President, I rise to address the horrific series of events which have occurred in eastern Ukraine within the last week. The shooting down of a civilian Malaysian airliner and the killing of 298 innocent people is an unspeakable tragedy, and one that frankly speaks out for us to address in terms of the responsibility. In this situation in eastern Ukraine, there are armed thugs who are in control of the territory where this plane was shot down. They have been armed and financed and inspired by Vladimir Putin and the Russians. That is the grim reality. All signs point to the fact that Putin, the Russians, and their supporters in eastern Ukraine are responsible for this terrible tragedy, the loss of 298 lives. I was in Ukraine a few weeks ago with Senator McCain and others, and it was at a time when Crimea was about to fall. It was clear then that the Ukrainians did not have the capacity to stop this effort by Putin to take over territory, and he did. And then that wasn't enough. He had to reach into eastern Ukraine for even more territory, stirring up problems, creating havoc, and sadly bloodshed in the process. Bad enough the Ukrainian citizens themselves were the victims, but now 298 innocent people on a civilian airliner were shot down over this territory. And as I've said, the evidence points directly to Moscow and its complicity in this horrible event. This is a photo which has been distributed showing pro-Russian separatists holding up some of the personal effects of the victims of the Malaysian airline flight that were shot down. What is happening there since the crash is also nothing short of horrific. At this moment in time, in virtually every place in the world, save perhaps North Korea, in virtually any other place in the world, international inspectors will be on the scene determining the cause of that plane's crash, and of equal or even greater importance, making certain that the recovery effort of the victims of this crash was done by the standards of civilized nations. But the eastern Ukrainian separatists, inspired by Putin and Moscow, have refused to allow these people in. What we're hearing in reports are horrible, of the corpses of these victims being taken and placed in refrigerator cars on trains. Can you imagine the anguish of the families associated with those victims as they hear this? A loved one shot out of the sky in a civilian airliner, apparently because of some folly by Eastern Ukrainian Russian-inspired thugs, and now they cannot even recover the remains of the people that they love, let alone a serious objective investigation about the cause of that crash. It is hard to imagine that Vladimir Putin could let it reach this point. Harder still to imagine that he doesn't own up to his responsibility. And horrifying that we've reached this point where this terrible, tragic scene goes from bad to worse as Putin's thugs go through the personal effects of the people who were shot down. There's a list of those who were lost in this compilation of victims. And I know the presiding officer, being from the state of Indiana, has a particular attachment to one of the victims. This one, Carolyn Kaiser, student at Indiana University from the Netherlands. This was well publicized in the Midwest that we'd lost this beautiful young woman who was a victim of this tragic crash. There were more, 297 more who died. They included Quinn Lucas Schansman, 19-year-old U.S.-Dutch citizen, born in the U.S. His family had moved back to the Netherlands when he was young. He was on his way to visit his grandfather in Indonesia. Joop Lange, an AIDS researcher from Netherlands, was a renowned Dutch AIDS researcher traveling with his partner to the International AIDS Conference in Australia. I mentioned Carleen Kaiser, a doctoral student at Indiana University in Bloomington. She was going on vacation with her boyfriend when this plane was shot down. Sister Philomene Tiernan, 77-year-old Roman Catholic nun, returning to her school in Australia, where she had taught thousands of students over her 30-year vocation. Andre Angel, 24, was a Canadian medical student on vacation with his girlfriend. Sri Siti Amra, 83-year-old, the step-grandmother of Malaysia's Prime Minister, heading to Indonesia to celebrate the end of Ramadan. Shazana Saleh, 31 years old, a flight attendant on the plane. Her father told the media that this was her dream, to be a flight attendant. In this heartbreaking photo of Shuba Yaya, 38 years old, Paul Goes, and their 1-year-old daughter, Kayla. Shuba was a Malaysian actress, her husband a Dutch businessman. They were returning to Malaysia from Holland after showing their daughter to their husband's parents. These victims of Mr. Putin's recklessness and their grieving families deserve more than the tragic and revolting actions occurring now in eastern Ukraine. And the Russian people, not the leadership, but the people of Russia deserve better. The Russian people have a proud history of accomplishment in so many different fields. But President Putin has created a climate of fear in his country where those who dissent to his policies will be punished. His use of Soviet-style propaganda and intimidation, shutting down of independent media and voices, and his strong arming of other peaceful nations are sadly an insult to the great achievements and legacy of the Russian people. I hope Mr. Putin still sees the importance of being a responsible world leader. There's little evidence of it in recent weeks. He can start almost immediately by calling off his shameful proxies that are so disrespecting the victims and their families at this crash site, a site for which they are most certainly responsible. Mr. President, my thoughts and prayers go out to the families of the victims. To our Dutch friends who suffered such an overwhelming loss of life in this crash, I want to express my deepest condolences. And to the people of Ukraine and the Baltics, Poland, and everywhere else facing Russian bullying, we stand with you in your desire for democracy and peaceful relations with the West and Russia.